Hello and welcome to another episode of Ain't It Scary with Sean and Carrie. I'm the titular Sean.
And I'm the very titular Carrie.
And on this show, we take you inside the unbelievable, the unexplainable, the macabre, and the bizarre, and try to find an answer. And this week, Caroline, I'm bringing you and our listeners the very first widely publicized, reported UFO abduction in American history.
Ooh.
This is what happened to Betty and Barney Hill.
Ah, yes.
Or at least what they say happened. One night in New Hampshire in 1961.
One Night in New Hampshire. Wasn't that a dirty film?
I don't know. I didn't go to your bachelorette.
Zing.
So, this is a very interesting case. I know you know a little bit of the broad strokes of this case. For our listeners, Barney and Betty Hill were a couple, a married couple who took a trip one night in the early 60s from New Hampshire to Canada and back. On their way home, they observed some strange lights in the sky, and then they, after feeling like they had lost some time on the drive, worried about their perceived amnesia for a couple months, eventually went to hypnosis sessions that brought out these memories of an abduction and examination they had had.
Yeah, pretty crazy story. One of the OGs.
Yeah, it was definitely one of the things, like we talked about with George Adamski, who's another of my favorite characters. This ties very heavily into the beginning of alien conspiracy thought and UFO truthers and the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, 40s into 60s, you have all of that good old-timey sci-fi going on, and you also have a lot of these events. We have George Adamski kind of heading it off. We have Roswell, and then we have this.
Yeah, Betty and Barney Hill. So let's talk about Betty and Barney real quick. Barney Hill dropped out of high school to enlist in the Army for 3 years. Mm-hmm. During which time a grenade accident actually blew out his teeth and forced him to get full dentures.
Oh my God.
Which he was a little self-conscious about. He also married his first wife around this time while he was in the service. Her name was Ruby, and he got a job as a mail carrier after his discharge.
Okay.
Started working for the post office. Now, in 1956, Barney was vacationing in Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
I've been there.
With his family. They lived in Philly at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Have I been to Portsmouth?
No, oh. I went with Sarah.
In any case, in Portsmouth, maybe you stayed at the same boarding house as Barney Hill and his wife did.
Oh, yeah, we were just two gals on the town staying at a boarding house.
Yeah, a friend of theirs owned a boarding house in town, so that's where they stayed on their little trip. And while they were there, they met a young Betty Barrett who was staying at the same boarding house while her home got renovated.
Oh.
They exchanged phone numbers, and the families kept in touch.
Mm-hmm.
Now, by the next year, Barney and his wife were separated, and he gave Betty a call. And
I bet he was planning on it.
The long-distance kind of friendship kind of heated up and kindled into a romance, and they would see each other frequently on weekends and for vacations. And before too long, Barney was actually meeting Betty's family in New Hampshire, which was a big and maybe stressful moment for Barney and Betty.
Sure, I mean, it is for anyone.
Yeah, but in this case, Barney was also black and Betty was white.
Ah.
And interracial relationships, let alone marriages, were still a pretty controversial thing in 1961.
Oh, for sure.
Sorry, 1957 we're still in.
Even worse.
So, as it turns out, Barney fit right in with Betty's family, by all accounts. There were a few bad apples who kind of stayed away from them because they were racist, but mostly the family raved about how kind and friendly and polite this man was, and best of all, and most importantly, he was kind of a socially minded political community organizer type, and he could talk politics and current events all day, which the Barrett family was big on politics and current events. So they loved sitting up at all hours talking politics around the table with Barney.
Well, that's nice. That's a nice little unexpected twist. I mean, you would expect, this divorced man, this guy who's not of our race, and it's the 50s. It's kind of like watching The Queen's Gambit and every scene being like, don't get molested, don't get molested, don't get molested.
Right. It was prestige television. We felt like it had to be coming.
Mm-hmm. And a period drama.
Now, for Betty's part, she was a divorcee. After a 14-year marriage, she had married a divorced chef, diner chef. I think he worked at a diner, named Bob Stewart. And Betty had just dropped out of college due to an abdominal infection that prevented her from finishing her degree. So looking at the end of her kind of college career, she married this guy, Bob, who she met at a diner, thought he was okay. And she spent the next 4 years raising Bob's 3 kids from a previous marriage while he cheated on her.
Nice, Bob.
Yeah. She stuck around for the benefit of the children, and by the time they left the nest, she was ready to leave as well.
Mm-hmm.
And she got a job as a social worker to support herself at the New Hampshire Division of Welfare, which she loved because Betty Hill loved to help people.
Nice lady, then.
Nice lady, and very similar to Barney. Part of what helped them get along so well.
Sure.
Now, meanwhile, Barney finally got transferred from Philadelphia to the Boston post office in March, which was at least closer to New Hampshire.
Sure.
And the two were married on May 12th, 1960. But they wouldn't, that was kind of almost a formality. They wouldn't live together for another 16 months after that while he's waiting for this transfer to go through.
Awful.
Yeah. And even after he moves, remember, Barney is now commuting from Portsmouth, New Hampshire to Boston every day.
Every day? That's at least...
It's 4 hours.
Each way?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then he works
I mean, it took us several hours to get to Portsmouth, so yeah.
And then he takes a mail carrier's shift in Boston, and then he drives 4 hours home.
I thought my dad still working in New York when we moved up to Connecticut was bad, but Jesus.
Yeah.
At least that was only like, I don't know, an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on the day. Wow. 4 hours. 8 hours in the car every day. Not even, because he's a mailman.
Mm-hmm.
So he's
spending all... Well, I don't know. It's also the early 60s, and mail carriers still sometimes do a foot route, right? So he could have been walking the streets of Boston with a bag.
God, he must have been exhausted.
Yeah. He also missed his sons from his previous marriage, who were back in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
He was also black and working in New Hampshire, or living in New Hampshire and working in Boston in the early 60s.
Well, it's better than Alabama.
Boston in the early 60s was a pretty racist place.
Sure.
In fact, Boston now isn't a not racist place. Anyway, the point...
I was going to make an Irish joke, but I decided not to.
Oh, don't worry. Barney will do it for you in a little bit.
Thanks, Barney.
Needless to say, in autumn of 1961, Barney badly needed a break. And he surprised Betty by requesting a few days off and suggesting a trip to Montreal and Niagara Falls. Pack your bags, Betty. We're going today.
What year is this?
1961.
61. Okay.
And they've been married for almost 2 years at this point, but they consider this a late honeymoon. It is the first vacation they've really gotten a chance to get.
Okay.
So on September 17th, which was a Sunday, they set out. They brought $70 between them, which was all the money they had, a cooler of food and drinks to supply them for the weekend, and Betty's pistol, because they thought they might not, if they couldn't find a motel at some point, they might be sleeping in the car, and they needed the pistol for protection. And they brought their dog, a dachshund named Delsey.
Yay! A dachshund. What kind of dachshund?
I don't know. I haven't been able to find any pictures of Delsey.
I need pictures. I need to know what kind of coat Delsey has.
Listeners, if you can find any pictures of Delsey, I believe she's a miniature dachshund.
Oh.
We would like to see what color her coat was.
Now, just let me know straight off the bat, does Delsey get out okay in this episode? Is she all right?
Well, if there's one thing I've learned, Carrie, in life, nobody gets out okay on a long enough timeline, but Delsey does survive this trip, yes.
Oh, I don't like how you said that.
Well, I'm just telling you that between 1961 and now, 2021, this dog has passed away.
If you say so.
So they drove to Niagara Falls. And they crossed
with the dog?
With the dog, yes.
Oh.
They crossed the border not far from there. I'm sure Delsey's sitting on Betty's lap and looking out the window.
Did Delsey get abducted too? Okay, hold on. I'm getting ahead. Now there's a dachshund in the equation, and I am just raring to go.
Really up the stakes for you there, Carrie.
It really did.
So they visit Toronto once they cross over into Canada, and they drove through the Thousand Islands region. And finally, on September 20th, they arrived in Montreal. They did a little bit of sightseeing, but they were done earlier than they thought, so while they were planning on staying in Montreal for the night, Barney kind of took a wrong turn on the way to where he thought a hotel would be, and then he said, okay, well, we'll just try to find a motel on the outskirts of town, but then I think he took another wrong turn.
Oh, Barney.
Just found himself driving further and further from the center of town, and so eventually they said, look, screw it, we'll just go home. There's a storm coming anyway, because Tropical Storm Esther was coming. Mm-hmm. And she had 130-mile-an-hour winds out over the Atlantic at this time. So they figured, well, just in case that's hitting tomorrow, we don't want to get stuck up here. If we get tired, we'll stop for the night in the White Mountains once we get to New Hampshire. But let's just try to make it home. Mm-hmm. 5-hour drive.
Simple.
Now, as they drive, Betty sees what at first she believes to be a falling star. Although she said it was streaking up rather than down.
I guess based on perspective, you might be a little turned around.
Yeah. But then the star she's watching comes to a stop in the southwest, inches its way upward, and Betty said later that she thought, oh, this is one of those satellites they've been talking about. Her dad was like super into the space program and had been telling her about, satellites, and she was, ooh, I'm seeing a satellite. But then the light in the sky ascended faster toward the moon and stopped suddenly again next to the moon. This didn't seem like what a satellite should be doing. And so Betty demands that Barney stop the car so that they can look at this.
Now, Sean, just as a little detour, have you ever seen anything weird and unexplainable in the night sky?
Well, you and I saw a fireball in the night sky.
We did see a fireball this past summer in out east on Long Island, and that was bonkers.
Yeah, we saw a streak of light that like got bigger and flamier as it moved across the sky.
And it made a sound.
Yep.
Like it was on fire.
And then it was gone. It was literally like a split second that this happened. And then a few moments passed, we looked at each other and we're like, did you see that? Did you see that?
Yep.
Yeah, I was literally looking up
fireballs in the sky.
No, well, I was scanning the news in the area to see if an airliner had exploded.
Yeah, but it seemed closer than that. It seemed like it was right over the bay. It was, folks, it was a wild, wild thing to see. And I'm glad, because I think you were turning or something at the time. And I'm like, Sean, look at that. And I'm glad you saw it, because you would have never believed me.
I wouldn't have. But yeah, I don't know if it was a meteor or what. It was cool. Mm-hmm. It's cool is what it was. All Betty and Barney could see at this moment was lights. And Barney is trying to ignore her, continues driving while Betty continues
Typical man.
To watch the craft. And Barney's telling her, that's an airplane you're looking at. But Betty watches this quote-unquote airplane follow an erratic path across the moon, back and forth. Barney finally says, okay, listen, I'll pull the car over. He pulls the car over to the side of the road, and they both take a look with binoculars. And Barney described the movement of the craft as being like a paddle ball.
Oh, like ping-ponging back and forth.
Yeah, it would move quickly one way, then without seeming to turn, move back in the other direction.
Interesting.
Like as if on the end of an elastic band and bouncing. Mm-hmm.
Which, I don't know if you guys know this, is not typical.
That's true. Airliners do not usually do that. In any case, they start driving again because, what are we going to do? I think Betty had an idea of following the craft. I think Barney might have told her, yeah, sure, but he really just probably wanted to get back on the road in the direction of New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. Well, Betty keeps watching this light in the sky, and to Barney's eyes, it does kind of seem to be following them. It's still overhead in the sky as they near Indian Head, a landmark he knew. This is a cliff face in New York State that looks like, it's not a carving. I believe it's a natural rock formation that looks like the face of a Native American.
So right now they're in New York.
Yeah, New York State.
Okay.
Not the city.
Yeah, I know.
And Barney finds he's been here before, he knows the place, he drives into a field, he parks the car, gets out, and takes out his binoculars to look at these lights in the sky. Both people said that at this point, the craft, they're calling it at this point, was much closer, maybe only a couple 100 feet over their head.
Oh, wow.
They described it as a flattened circular disc, and it was, at this point that Barney stops the car in the middle of the road, throws the door open, and looks at it with his binoculars. And as he watches, the disc makes an arcing movement from directly overhead to the treetops, above the treetops in an adjacent field, and then back again. He said the craft was looked like it was 60 to 80 feet across. Very big.
But flat.
But flat, yes.
Interesting.
As he watches, Barney claims 2 fins or wings extended from the sides of the craft with red lights on them. And he looks through the binoculars and sees windows, 2 rows of windows across the front of the craft, and inside what he thought was a group of figures.
Oh. So it's pretty close at this point.
Yeah, that's what Barney says. And around this time, he tears the binoculars from his face, sprints back to the car, screams hysterically at Betty, "They're going to capture us!"
Oh.
And he throws the car into gear and drives south. Now, as Barney drives south, the disc supposedly shifted directly over their car, so they couldn't see it anymore.
Ooh, that's creepy.
It's
like Jaws swimming under the boat.
Yes. It's so much that moment. And Betty and Barney then said they both heard a buzzing or beeping sound that, quote, bounced off the trunk of the car. I don't know how to take that meaning.
Huh.
The sound bounced off the car, they say. But a buzzing or beeping sound, and the car vibrated, and they felt their bodies tingle. Now, after some time, they heard a similar noise, and then kind of shook out of what felt like a trance, they said, looked down and realized they had traveled 35 miles.
And he's still actively driving at this point?
Yes, but they had apparently basically no memory of that stretch of time between the
Well, it's
tinglings.
weird for both of them. I mean, drivers often get highway hypnosis, not usually for 35 miles, and certainly not usually the passenger. Now, the important question here, Sean, is what was the dog up to?
Oh, I have no intel on Delsey. I have to imagine she was being a good, sweet girl.
Good.
When the Hills tried to remember what had happened during that 35-mile drive, as they were discussing it later, they could only put together vague flashes of memory. A sudden unplanned turn, a roadblock of some kind, and a huge fiery orb resting on the ground. In any case, they pressed on, expecting to arrive around 3 a.m. based on when they had left. But dawn was breaking as they rolled into Portsmouth.
Okay. Weird.
Yeah, both their watches were stopped as they looked down at them. And in fact, both of those watches never ticked again. But when the Hills arrived home, they found that instead of 4.5 hours like they expected, their drive had taken 7.
Wow. Did the car have a clock?
It's never mentioned once. Only the fact that their watches are broken.
Interesting. Okay. That's a lot of extra time.
It's missing time, which is a common thing in abduction stories.
Yep.
And for Betty and Barney Hill, it's where the story really starts, not ends. So, but let's get into it, right? In the immediate aftermath of this event, Barney found that the leather strap on his binoculars had broken, but he couldn't remember when that had happened. Ditto for the toes of his dress shoes, his best dress shoes, he said, which had been scraped badly, but he couldn't remember that happening either.
Almost as if they had been dragged on the ground.
Interesting. Now, Barney felt compelled, he said, to go into the bathroom basically immediately and inspect his genitals.
What?
He didn't feel anything wrong with them or see anything wrong with them, but he was like, I got to take a look at these. And then,
is that typical, Sean? Like after any weird situation, do you always just check out your junk?
I call it a quick catalog, make sure everything's still there, still intact.
Weird. Okay.
And both Hills felt compelled to take long showers. And then they slept for a little while. It wasn't until after she woke up that Betty noticed that the dress she had worn on the trip was torn at the hem, the zipper, and the lining. And there was some kind of a pink powder near the tears. Yeah, I bet you'd love to know more about that powder, but unfortunately Betty hung the dress on a clothesline and the powder blew away.
Damn.
Yeah. There were also shiny spots on the car, she noticed, that weren't there before, specifically on the trunk.
Shiny spots like they had been over buffing it, or what does it look like?
That's the impression I get. Like, it's just the same color of paint, but shinier, significantly, noticeably shinier in a circle of a couple inches across. Yeah, like someone had buffed those spots.
Interesting.
Now, Betty called a physicist friend of the family, I guess, or a friend of the family knew a physicist, supposedly.
Who doesn't have just a physicist friend?
Someone gave them the advice to wave a compass around those spots on the car to see if anything happened. Because
that's just drunk Uncle George. Wave a compass over it, maybe we'll tell you something.
Well, apparently, many stories there are elements of many UFO encounter and abduction stories that have some elements suggesting strong magnetic fields are involved. Mm-hmm. So the idea was see if the see if anything magnetic was done to your car. Mm-hmm. Now, Barney and Betty claim that when they waved a compass near those shiny spots, the needle would spin crazily.
Specifically over the spots.
Yes.
Huh.
Barney also noticed the trunk was unlocked.
Well.
Unlatched.
That could have just been Barney being Barney.
It could have been. My trunk is frequently unlatched.
Well, don't spread that around.
Now, the couple... Barney's inclination was to never speak of this to anyone.
Typical man.
I can't blame him. It sounds crazy, and he didn't want to be viewed as crazy. Mm-hmm. But a cop neighbor told them that it would be a good idea to report this to nearby Pease Air Force Base, which did request, had a general ongoing request out for reports of any unexplained aerial phenomenon.
Sure, I'm sure they were very, very concerned about Russian spacecraft or missiles or things like that.
Exactly right. And Betty called them up and gave her story, but she says she withheld some of the details that she thought would sound crazy.
Like the losing time and stuff?
Like losing time, like Barney's intimations that he may have seen people through the windows of a spacecraft. Mm-hmm. The following day, a Major Paul Henderson called to take a phone interview from Betty, and he forwarded her report to Project Blue Book, which was the government's project to investigate and catalog UFO phenomena.
Yeah, that was the OG X-Files, basically.
For the record, based on that initial report, Major Henderson's opinion was that these people had probably misidentified Jupiter.
No.
Jupiter, you'll note, does not move.
Doesn't have windows. There's a whole lot of things that it doesn't do or have.
Betty was referred to NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. Mm-hmm. A name that sounds like a government panel that would have been created in the 50s or 60s, but is in fact a private organization of UFO nerds.
Yeah, that was going to be my main question. Is this legit?
Now, in this report, Betty included all of the weird stuff about men who Barney claimed to have seen through the windows in shiny black uniforms.
Oh.
More on that later. Now, a Walter Webb, a NICAP investigator, came to perform a 6-hour interview with Betty.
They're thorough, that NICAP.
Yeah, he tried to talk to Barney about it too, but
He was busy in the bathroom checking his genitals.
Well, Barney confided to Webb that he thought he might have some mental blocks regarding the events, and he was starting to be concerned that there were parts of the night that his brain didn't want him to remember.
Oh, repressing. Like trauma.
Repressed memories. And this is an idea that's going to start to obsess Barney over the next couple of years. In any case, Webb reported back to NICAP with full confidence that the Hills were telling 100% the truth. He believed these people.
Okay, so we got Jupiter, we got they're legit. So let's see what other opinions we get.
Well, they didn't really talk to too many people about it, and it was just gnawing away at the Hills' minds, kind of. That missing time is the big thing. 2.5 hours of your life that seem to be gone is is a disturbing thing, especially with what Barney claimed he had seen just before the time went missing.
Sure, that's a lot.
Yeah, and they had no more kind of answers, no more focus to this, until Betty started having a series of intense and vivid dreams. Actually,
she eating Doritos before bed?
Unclear. They probably were invented at this point, but I'm not even sure about that. September 29th, 1961, Betty started to have these dreams. They continued
so this is soon after.
10 days, yeah.
Okay.
5 nights, she said they were the most intense dreams she ever had. But they were a disconnected kind of series of vignettes from the sound of it. And it was only through conscious kind of notebooking after she woke up, she would write down her dreams, right? And she was able to put together a narrative of these kind of different pieces. Mm-hmm. A timeline that seemed to make sense. Betty dreamed of a roadblock, which we remember from the flashes of memory they supposedly had. But now the roadblock included men surrounding the car. At which point, Betty felt like she was losing consciousness, but trying to fight it.
Men, specifically.
Men. She then dreamed she was forced to walk through the woods by 2 of these men.
Are they wearing the shiny black uniforms?
They are wearing the shiny black uniforms. They are... actually, she doesn't mention shiny black uniforms in her dream, I'm sorry. But they are about 5 feet tall in her dream. And the men have dark eyes and hair, like jet black eyes and hair, gray skin, blue lips, and prominent Jimmy Durante-style noses.
Doesn't sound like these guys are doing very well. Gray skin and blue lips. Oof.
Betty also dreamed of walking up a ramp with 2 of the little men into a disc-shaped metallic craft with Barney walking behind her. Mm-hmm. She thought Barney might be sleepwalking or in some kind of a trance because he wouldn't answer her in the dream. She dreamed that she and Barney were separated, that she protested to one of the little men, and one who she kind of sensed was the leader, maybe? Explained to her that together, if they were examined together, it's going to take longer. So it's better if we separate you.
I like how even this like alien creature is like, just don't worry about it, okay? Just don't worry about it.
She's then brought into a separate room in the dream. And another of the men walks in. She thinks of this one as the examiner, or she always refers to him as the examiner.
Ugh.
Now, the examiner spoke English.
He had very long fingers.
The examiner spoke English to her in the dream, but imperfectly. He was hard to understand. And he wanted to note the difference between humans and these, whatever these people were. So they sat her down in a chair, shone a bright light on her. She dreamt of her eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and hands being examined, her fingernails being trimmed.
Ew.
At some point, the little men scraped some skin off of, I think, her leg onto a cellophane-like substance with a dull knife, like a letter opener. And then they tell her they need to perform a nervous system test.
No, thank you.
And there's this EEG-like machine where they have these 2 needles.
Oh, I don't like a needle.
Oh, but these aren't injections. These needles are just gently touched to Betty's temples, face, neck, and spine, and also under her arms and around her hips.
Okay, so it doesn't like pierce her.
No, and she didn't see any kind of, the little needles on the paper tracing brainwaves. She didn't see any readout like that, but she assumed one must be somewhere.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Then they removed her dress.
Nope. Mm-mm.
The leader had a little trouble with the zipper and her dress tore slightly. And she said, no, wait, let me just show you how it works. And she shows him how the zipper works, and they don't destroy the rest of the dress.
It's like fumbling around with a high schooler.
And then they take out a 4 to 6 inch needle and stick it into Betty's belly button.
I literally, I think I heard my mom scream from the other town.
I'm certain your dad did as she's listening to this episode.
Oh, God.
Betty feels intense pain, stabbing. She said,
yeah.
But she said not even like the pain that you would expect from this needle, more like if it was a knife being driven into her belly.
There's something about the belly button. Mm-mm.
The leader, quote unquote, the one she thought of as the leader.
Hey, pipe down, you're fine.
Looked at the examiner and the leader looked at each other, I guess, with confusion about her pain. And then the leader like waved a hand in front of her face and the pain vanished.
Wow. Okay.
Remember, this is all just Betty's accounts of her dreams we're going on right now.
Yeah. It's messed up.
At that point, the examiner leaves and Betty's left alone for a little while.
Did they take the needle out or leave it in?
No, they took it out.
Okay.
She dreamed that sometime later, there was a commotion from the next room.
Barney.
And several of the little men came back in with the examiner, and the examiner starts looking in Betty's mouth.
Ew.
And reaching into her mouth and tugging at her teeth, perplexed.
Oh, that's kind of funny.
The leader came in and explained, his came out, and yours didn't.
And I'd like to keep it that way, Slim.
Exactly. Yeah, leave mine alone. Betty thought this was funny. It is funny.
Yeah, it is funny.
And she explained dentures to the leader. But
he puts fake ones in his mouth because his were all blown out.
I'm not quoting anything here. I'm deeply paraphrasing, but you have to imagine Betty was already paraphrasing because she's quoting her own dream, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't feel bad about it. The conversation went something like this. Well, you see, Barney has to wear dentures, which, sometimes when humans get older, they have to wear...
Sometimes when humans blow them out with a grenade.
They have to wear fake teeth because their old ones aren't... But Barney's not old. He just had an accident. And then the leader goes, what is old?
Yikes.
And she goes, oh, okay. So humans only live a certain amount of time before they die. I think it's like 100 years, but usually it's less.
What is die?
What is time was his next
Oh,
question.
no.
He had no concept of time, and Betty gave up. That was
that's
too big.
That's a little much.
Too big to explain. As the conversation turned to other areas, at some point, it's hard to place this in the timeline because remember, these dreams came to her as fractured, like unconnected events. Mm-hmm. At some point, she also dreamed of having a conversation with the leader, who's my favorite character in this story.
100%.
Where she's explaining, we eat stuff like meat, potatoes, vegetables, milk. What is vegetables?
I mean, if he didn't know what time was, he's not going to know what friggin' broccoli is.
And at this point, oh boy, she's trying to explain. Oh boy. But she said that there's such a great variety of vegetables that she didn't know how to describe what a vegetable was.
It's something that comes from the ground and... She
didn't get there. She just said, well, it's this thing that's, but there's so many of them. Well, squash is my favorite.
Okay.
What is squash?
Yeah, obviously.
This is all really what she said.
What is favorite?
Betty really had this dream. She said, well, squash is a yellow. What is yellow?
No.
And then she wandered the room trying to find yellow things to show them what yellow was, but there was no yellow in the room. Nothing yellow.
Honey, how'd you even decide to come to Earth? You don't know shit.
In another dream, Betty saw a book of strange symbols, about 5 by 8 inches, and made of what looked like plastic. I picture like laminated pages on a spiral binding. Mm-hmm. And inside were tables full of just strange symbols. And the leader jokingly asks her, can you read it?
Oh, someone thinks he's a comedian.
And she says, no, that's not possible, but I'd love to take this as a souvenir because no one's going to believe me. And the leader's cool with it. He goes, yes, you can take it.
Souvenir, tourism.
Betty asked where the men came from, and the leader pulled from the ceiling, like in a 1960s classroom, a geography class style map, like a telescoping map, came down from a thing of stars, and he pointed to a cluster of stars.
Looks nice.
But around this time, as she was looking at the map, the other aliens in the room, the other little men in the room, we don't know what they are. Yeah, the other little men noticed that she was holding the book, and there was an argument amongst all of the...
You told her she could take the book. No, she can't take the book. That's my book.
And finally, the leader, who maybe wasn't so much the leader after all, had to explain that he'd been overruled and the others didn't want them to remember.
Hey, sorry, hate to take back a gift, but gonna have to take that book now.
He elaborated that even if they did remember anything, their stories would differ slightly, and therefore no one would ever believe them because of the modification that had been done to their memories.
Well, that's
smart.
Convenient.
It's very smart.
Oh, smart, yes.
Yeah.
Smart's the word.
So those were the dreams, and Betty told a few friends about this, but mostly, especially Barney, wanted to keep this mostly under wraps and not talk to too many people about the small men and the spacecraft.
Mm-hmm.
But I get the impression that Betty talked about these dreams a lot.
Oh.
Meanwhile, Betty and Barney both still couldn't. Betty's starting to put a hypothesis together for what happened during those missing hours of time, but Barney's still deeply uncomfortable with the amnesia that they seemed to have during that drive.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of theirs mentioned hypnosis at some point as a possibility. Betty, super into that. Barney, not so much. He thought it sounded a little new agey.
Yeah.
You know, little fake, little, I don't know. Barney's a man of the 60s. He doesn't want to be hypnotized.
He's a man of the early 60s.
Yeah.
Late 60s, he'd be doing LSD and tripping in a field or something.
But as the years go on, Barney's health worsens. Anxiety and exhaustion mount from his daily 4-hour commute to Boston and back. He's super involved at church and with civil rights causes, and again, he's kind of a community leader. He serves on various committees and councils whenever he can, so he's keeping himself busy even when he's not spending 16 to 18 hours a day going to and from work.
Yeah.
And doing work. And at this point, he's suffering from high blood pressure, constant headaches, and insomnia.
Well, that does track for me for the amount of stress this guy was under.
Absolutely. And this culminated in an ulcer that was failing to respond to any of the normal treatments.
Ugh.
So constant head pain, constant stomach pain. In June 1963, Barney's physician told him he suspected all these ailments were psychosomatic due to the stress, and he referred him to a shrink who happened to work in the same building.
I've definitely heard that for stomach aches.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of symptoms the body can manifest.
Oh, for sure.
Psychosomatically.
I've just heard that particularly about stomach aches.
Yeah, well, an ulcer definitely can be stress-related.
Mm-hmm.
This psychiatrist, Barney didn't seem to mind the work he was doing with the psychiatrist. He went for a couple of months. But he ended up asking the new shrink about this crazy hypnosis thing he'd heard about.
Mm-hmm.
And the psychiatrist said it was actually kind of a promising new field and referred him to Dr. Benjamin Simon, a psychiatrist and hypnotist in Boston.
Okay.
And it was Dr. Simon who would pull from the Hills the lurid and fantastic details of their abduction episode.
Ooh.
You see, hypnotists believe they can get to deep memories, repressed memories, hidden memories, by revisiting those memories in a hypnotic trance state rather than a conscious one.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll find out if it worked after the break.
This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Lots of things are a struggle right now. School, work, even something as simple as going to the grocery store. It could feel overwhelming. But one thing that shouldn't be overwhelming is accessing mental and emotional care. That's where BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp is the leader in online counseling with over 4,000 licensed counselors on the site and over 500,000 people who have gotten counseling to date. The mission of BetterHelp is to make professional counseling accessible, affordable, and convenient, so anyone who struggles with life's challenges can get help anytime, anywhere. I've been using BetterHelp for the better part of this year, and honestly, I don't know how I would have gotten through 2020 without it. And, of course, Sean and Poe. When I need to talk to my counselor, I can just text her and I can schedule chats, phone calls, or video calls for longer sessions. This means I have flexibility to set a session during the week, or during busy weeks, I can just shoot her a message here and there when I have time. Take control of your mental and emotional well-being. BetterHelp is a great place to start. For 10% off your first month subscription of BetterHelp, go to our podcast link at www.betterhelp.com/ain'titscary and see how good it can feel to push past the struggle and find hope in a new day. That's www.betterhelp.com/AINTITSCARY for 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. Get professional counseling anytime, anywhere, because you deserve to be happy.
Welcome back. When last we left you, Betty and Barney Hill were about to embark on a journey of self-discovery, or rediscovery, as Dr. Benjamin Simon attempted to recover their apparent lost memories through hypnotic regression. Now, Rome wasn't built in a day, and memories aren't hypnotically regressed in a day either. Dr. Simon hypnotized each of the Hills separately, and over the course of weeks and weeks of hour-long sessions.
So they were both going to Boston,
every Saturday.
Oof. Barney's like, I can't get out of the car.
And he got Barney's sessions out of the way first, and then he went and did Betty's sessions. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that's interesting about the memories that we get to in these hypnosis sessions. And everything was recorded, of course, but some of Barney's audio eventually became public domain after being featured in an audiobook version of a book that we haven't gotten to yet in our program here. So the point is, some of this audio has come down to us, and so you can really get a sense for Barney's emotional state. Mm-hmm. This doesn't sound like a man who's lying. It, first of all, sounds like a man who's hypnotized. And, well, I don't know. We'll just have to let his words speak for themselves. But what Dr. Simon was able to get out of Barney was a much more detailed account than we had before. Not only does this fill in the missing time in a manner, spoiler alert, that is pretty similar to Betty's dreams I described. Mm-hmm. Not only that, it also adds a lot more detail than Barney had previously given about the earlier sighting of the UFO craft.
Before they got onto it.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, even on the small amount of tape that we have, you can hear that Barney is frequently upset by these memories, or what he thinks are memories. And there are outbursts of emotion to the point where Simon will occasionally end a session early if things are getting too emotional and upsetting. And he told Barney, he made the decision pretty early on to tell Barney under hypnosis that he wouldn't remember any of this until he could remember all these things without trauma.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that speaks well of Dr. Simon, then, that he's not just pushing this guy.
We go deeper and deeper, deeper asleep, far asleep, deeper and deeper. You will not be anxious or distressed, but you will remember everything, and you will tell me everything. Yes.
So you can hear Barney's voice at the end there.
Yeah.
Now, as Barney told this version of the story, he confided to Dr. Simon that Betty was badgering him about this light in the sky that he was pretty sure was a plane, and he kept trying to tell her that. But it sounds like the more he had to tell her that, the more he started doubting himself.
Sure. I mean, the more it zips around, it's harder to explain that it's a plane.
And the more nervous he was getting. I think you can hear the emotion here.
I believe Betty is trying to make me think this is a flying saucer. Was it light enough to see? It was just a light moving through the sky, and I heard no noise. And I think this is ridiculous. And Betty, it is not a flying saucer. What are you doing that for? You want to believe in this thing, and I don't.
very telling at the end there. Betty wants to believe in this thing, and I don't.
Yeah, it seems like she might have been excited, like, "Ooh, maybe it's a flying saucer." And he's like, "No, it's a plane."
It's like, that's crazy people stuff. Stop talking about crazy people stuff. We're not crazy people.
Right?
Finally, and he makes it, even in his, you can hear how tranced out he is, right? Mm-hmm. Even in his half-conscious state, Barney sounds like he was getting pretty irritated with Betty, and finally pulled off to get a closer look at the craft, almost just to shut her up.
And I think I will get a good look at this, because Betty was very annoying.
Because Betty was very annoying.
That is a man under hypnosis.
Now, you're not incapable of showing emotion when you're under hypnosis. You can hear how kind of deadened his voice is. But like I said, there are times when he gets genuinely upset on these tapes. And they're not that seldom either. For example, when we talked about the encounter with the big pancake in the field, or when they parked in the middle of the road.
The flying pancake.
Yeah, the giant flying pancake. As he's trying to describe what he saw in the sky to Dr. Simon, that's the first time Barney, you can really hear him sort of freak out on the tape.
I try to maintain control so Betty cannot tell I am scared. God, I'm scared.
It's all right. You can go right on, experience it. It will not hurt you now.
I got to get my gun.
All right. All right, that's all. Stop. Go to sleep, Steve. You forget now. You forget it now. You've forgotten.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, does it sound like he's a little upset?
Yeah, and he doesn't sound like he's faking it either. That is genuine terror.
No, I think what we're hearing there is this is a man who genuinely thinks he lost time. His wife has been telling him for 2 years now that they were abducted in that time and experimented on. She doesn't know what happened to him because he was in a different room. And he's somewhere between thinking he's crazy and thinking he was raped by aliens.
Yeah. And he probably fiddled around with his dentures, too.
And neither one sounds good to him.
No.
And
I'm not sure which one I'd pick.
I think you're hearing a man who is really at his wit's end and at a crossroads between what reality should be and what his perception is. Mm-hmm. He does, however, he regains composure and he's able to give Dr. Simon more detail on the inhabitants of the craft. He says that there were 8 to 11 of them looking back at him through the 2 rows of windows. He said they wore black, shiny uniforms, and one looked over his shoulder at Barney with a friendly smile.
Could you see him clearly?
Yes, I thought.
What's his face like? What does it make you think of?
It's round. I think of a red-haired Irishman.
You weren't expecting that, were you?
No, I was expecting a big-nosed little guy.
Nope, a red-headed Irishman.
Okay.
Now, Dr. Simon's a little confused by this, and still under hypnosis, Barney explains that it's not that this man had the features of an Irish man, a red-headed Irish man. It was more the way he felt inside, reminded under hypnosis Walter of an Irishman. And here's why. Maybe it's more of a social thing than a physical one.
Because Irish are usually hostile to Negroes. And when I see a friendly Irish person, I react to it by thinking I will be friendly.
I will say that I love people of all colors and creeds.
Makes me feel real awkward about having the last name McCabe.
Like I said, the city of Boston is not great on race. So if these things didn't look like people exactly, this wasn't an actual red-headed Irishman, what did they look like? And he only tries to give a little bit of description of the beings here in his accounts, although he did also draw a sketch of one of the creatures under hypnosis.
Do you have the sketch?
Of course I do.
Yes.
Did they have faces like other people? You say one reminded you of a red-headed Irishman.
His eyes were slanted. I see it so. His eyes were slanted, but not like a Chinese.
Oh, boy. Barney.
I love the way he says that one. His eyes were slanted. Oh, I see. His eyes were slanted.
Oh, boy. So the top one's Barney?
Yeah, the bottom two are from a later book with an artist's help.
Is he
like
wearing a
sketch.
little hat?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not
Is
sure
that
what
a toupee?
Oh, that might be part of their uniform. I think they had little caps.
Stop. They look like Team Rocket?
They look like Nazi uniforms, if we're being honest. Barney said that one of the little men actually appeared to be wearing well, they all had the black glossy uniforms on, but one of them, who Barney kind of viewed as the leader in this little window, turned and looked directly at Barney.
Did he have a tiny mustache?
He didn't, but he had a black scarf thrown over his left shoulder.
Excuse me.
So he's like Hugo Weaving in Captain America.
Wow, fancy.
Yeah, so the Red Skull is looking down at him, while all of the other beings moved to the back of the craft towards some kind of a control panel. And the leader with the scarf, as he looked at Barney, he had a message.
Do you like my scarf?
He didn't say anything. He was too far away, but he had a message that Barney understood intuitively.
Stay there and keep looking. Just keep looking and stay there. And just keep looking. Just keep looking.
Could you hear him tell you?
Oh, I got to pull these binoculars away from my eyes. Because if I don't, I'll just keep staying there.
Could you hear him tell you this?
Oh, no, he didn't say it.
You felt he said it.
I know.
You know he said
Just
it.
there, yeah. Just stay there, he's saying to me.
Yikes.
In case you couldn't tell from the tone in his voice, Barney did not want to just stay there.
He's not happy right now.
No, and in case you couldn't tell, we are at this point just moments away from another outburst from Barney.
It's
All right.
pounding in my head. Just
All
don't
right.
pull the binoculars away. God, give me strength.
All right.
Pull them down. Run. Pull these binoculars down and run. God. If there's a God, give me strength. I gotta get away. Oh. Betty.
All
We
right.
gotta get away, Betty.
All right. Calm down. Calm down.
I'm driving. I
Calm
gotta
down.
get away.
So now he's driving.
Oh, God. This is harrowing.
Yeah, really. And here is the first time here's the first time Barney gets his memories, allegedly, of driving away from that craft. Remember, on the night, Barney only remembered maybe a buzzing or humming sound.
Mm-hmm.
And then things got fuzzy. There were no real memories. But under hypnotic regression, he thought there might have been a little more to it after they had pulled off the road.
I know what's in my mind, and I don't want to say it.
Well, you can say it to me. You can say it now.
They're men, all with black jackets. And I don't have any money. I don't have anything.
He thinks he's being robbed by a group of men around his car.
Mm-hmm. That flew in from the sky to rob him.
Well, I don't think hypnosis Barney has made the connection between the abductors and the men around the car yet.
Mm.
He said there were 6 men standing in a dirt road when the car stalled. And Barney described these men as staring into his eyes. He actually says pushing. Their eyes pushed into my eyes with a terrifying, mesmerizing kind of an effect, which caused him to close his eyes very tightly.
As he was still driving?
Oh, no, they had been stopped by the men standing on the road. Barney closed his eyes very tightly and, from the sound of it, kept them closed basically for the rest of the time.
Like the rest of the abduction?
I am only thinking of mental pictures because my eyes are closed, and I think I am going up a slight incline.
Betty's hypnosis session described being taken up a ramp into the craft.
Mm-hmm.
This would appear to be that part of the experience.
Look, Barney, we're going on their ship.
Through very vague impressions, Barney's accounts get much vaguer at this point because, remember, his eyes are closed.
Well, Betty also said he was like in a trance. Did she say his eyes were closed? Maybe they made it feel like his eyes were closed.
That could be, or Betty could have turned around, saw him with his eyes tightly shut, and thought he was sleepwalking for that reason.
Yeah.
In any case, Barney felt like the two of them had been separated. He thought 3 men had taken him to a room and laid him down on a small rectangular table. He continued to keep his eyes closed this whole time because he was terrified.
Yeah.
But the examination proceeded. A little bit different than... A little bit...
Is it like the SNL sketch about the abductees? Yeah, it was a little different for me.
Kate McKinnon, the best. No, but it was a little different than Betty's, presumably because of their gender.
I was laying on the table, and my fly was open, and I thought, are they putting a cup around my private parts?
Did they open the fly, or was he like, oh, shit?
That's a good question. He just says his fly was open, so I don't know if they dropped it. They seem to have trouble with Betty's zipper, so that makes me think Barney just forgot.
You know, it happens.
Because his zipper wasn't torn. A cup-like device was placed over his genitals. He didn't feel any orgasm or pleasure of any kind.
Thanks for the info.
But he did give the doctor the impression that he thought some sperm had been taken from him anyway.
Oh, boy.
Barney's skin was scraped, and his ears and mouth were examined. He was flipped over onto his belly, and a thin tube, he said slightly larger than a pencil, was inserted easily into his anus and then removed. There was no pain.
Now, did anything get done to Betty in the
anus?
No, just that at all. I don't remember her ever mentioning private parts.
No, they did the needle thing on her.
But not in the butt.
No, not in the butt.
Well, he has a belly button too.
I got a belly button too, you know.
I'm sure he was pissed when he found that. You got the belly button? God damn it.
Someone also, he felt a finger on his spine, almost like someone was counting his vertebrae.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, Barney felt like they were moved back together. He heard Betty and the leader speaking in a mumbling language he couldn't understand. He noticed none of the creatures' mouths moved when they talked to him, so he thought the speech they were doing to him might be some kind of thought transference, he called it. He didn't have the word telepathy. What
did they say to him?
Oh, just things like, this won't hurt. You know, it's going to be easier. You'll be back to your... Both of them said, the aliens said, you'll be back to your car easier and faster if you just go with it, you know, kind of thing.
Just go with it.
Yeah, they mostly seem to talk to Betty.
Well, she has a lot of questions.
Yeah, she was almost badgering them. And finally, he said his eyes were still closed as footsteps on either side of him escorted them back to the car. Down the slight...
Put your pants back on now, sir.
Down the slight incline and to the car. He found himself at his car again with the tiring ordeal over.
She gets into the car, and I am grinning at her, and she is grinning back at me. And we both seemed so elated. And we are really happy. And I'm thinking, it isn't too bad. How funny. I have no reason to fear.
Grinning.
Yeah, who doesn't love a probe?
It seemed like he didn't. Seems like he wasn't a fan. He was very upset earlier.
Well, here's what's interesting. We can get into it later. It's very interesting to me that all of his like really emotional outbursts come during when he's just seeing the craft, and not when he's actually abducted and examined, which you would think would be the most scary part.
Sure.
Although he did say he kept his eyes closed. Anyway, Betty's hypnosis sessions largely agreed with Barney's account of things. They both said the aliens broke into groups of 3 and came around the car. Actually, Betty said that 4 approached on her side, but she also said that Barney quickly closed his eyes, so maybe he just didn't see that last guy. Betty's regression was much more detailed than her dreams were. And there were some differences. In the dreams, she sat quietly in the car, and the alien, the first little man, as he walked up, said to her, the longer you resist, the longer this will take. And so she sat quietly and let them escort her. But in the regression, she tried to flee into the woods, and she was forcibly captured by them. In the dream, the aliens were calm and professional throughout. But in the regression, one of the aliens standing behind her got agitated and jabbed into her back when she wouldn't move fast enough.
Ugh.
In the dream, the EEG machine didn't have any kind of a monitor or tracer. In the regression, it had a big, she said, TV-like structure with all kinds of lines or something like that. Direct quote. And needles were touched to her spine, behind her ears, head, arms, legs. Then she was rolled over, and needles were touched to her vertebrae. When Betty was stabbed in the stomach in the regression, there was no nice hand wave. The pain continued even after the needle had been pulled out of her belly. And the map had changed to something pulled out of a hole in the wall. The leader now reached into a hole in the wall and pulled out a map about 3 foot by 2 foot for her to see, instead of the geography class map that had been pulled down in her dream.
So what do you think? Was the dream stuff just kind of her brain trying to reckon with it and make it a more pleasant experience?
Betty got very emotional as well. Simon ended at least one of her sessions early because tears were streaming down her face. And she didn't draw any of the creatures, to my knowledge, but Dr. Simon suggested under hypnosis that Betty could probably draw the star map that she had seen.
I don't know. I could barely... If you asked me to draw the constellation Orion, I don't even know if I could do it.
I'll show you the result. It is 12...
Wow.
12 supposed stars connected by some thicker lines and some smaller dotted lines. Betty explained to the doctor that the thicker lines were trade routes, and that this triangle of dotted lines over here represents stars that are visited less frequently.
And are those stars in between as well?
Yes.
There's just no trade routes. Huh.
So, what did Dr. Simon make of all this?
Tell me.
Well, after months of hypnosis sessions, once he felt he had gotten a full accounting of their memories, Dr. Simon told Betty and Barney that when hypnosis is done right, the subjects are unable to lie. He told them that everything they said would be the truth. Now, to Dr. Simon, that doesn't necessarily mean that those things factually happened.
But they believe it happened.
But they definitely believe that they happened. Dr. Simon's theory was that Barney's recollections were a fantasy inspired by Betty's dreams, which she'd talked about for basically 2 years. He wrote an article for Psychiatric Opinion that called the phenomenon a singular psychological aberration. He finally returned the tapes to Betty and Barney and told them that he hoped that repeated listens to the tapes would help reduce their trauma.
Yeah, that's something fun to pop on for a road trip.
Well, he tried to explain to them that, and by the way, in Simon's mind, he didn't buy into the whole ET hypothesis.
Sure, clearly.
So it was upsetting to them to hear Dr. Simon say, it was impossible for you to lie under this. Nothing you said is lies. But also, I don't think any of these things actually happened. And so the Hills were disappointed with their answers, but they were happy with the regression because the problem they had was this chunk of their memory that was missing, and it was obviously really disturbing Barney. And now, apparently, they had an answer.
Sure.
So it's all good, right?
I have a feeling it's not.
Well, the Hills didn't seek publicity. They shared the tapes with some friends in the UFO community, though, because Barney was too uncomfortable to listen to them alone.
So they have friends in the UFO community and the physicist community?
Well, you remember our friend Walter Webb from NICAP.
Yes.
When he heard these tapes, he was like, "This is real."
I mean, it sounds real. Whatever they're going through sounds real.
This is totally real, he says. And
quote unquote.
yes, this is totally real. Walter Webb. Webb introduced the Hills to a few local UFO societies, and they started doing a few talks at kind of small gatherings, a couple dozen people, that kind of thing. The kind of places, what's his name, Doe and T were talking at before they did Heaven's Gate. So they did a few talks, but they weren't really looking for fame, supposedly. Fame found them, though, in 1965, when a reporter for the Boston Traveler named John Luttrell started sneaking around and asking friends all over Boston about the Hills.
How did he find out about them?
Well, they weren't seeking publicity. They weren't making an effort to hide either. Remember, they were going and doing lectures at little UFO clubs and things. So people were talking about them, but no major media had covered the story. Luttrell's editor gave him months to do a piece on this, an investigative piece that ran for 5 days in the Boston Traveler newspaper.
Damn.
The Hills tried to fight this with everything they had. Barney was potentially about to be appointed to the State Human Rights Commission, and he had just been appointed to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. So
so you don't want that kind of clouding anything you do. Yeah,
because then what do? You sound like a crazy person again. Yeah. So they refused all interviews. They asked their buddy Walter Webb at NICAP to also refuse all interviews, which he did. Good friend.
Yeah, because he was like, just one.
I love interviews. I love cameras.
Just one.
There's nothing a UFO researcher loves more than a camera. And there's nothing a camera hates more than a UFO researcher.
Brutal, Sean.
The article was published on Monday, October 25th, 1965, with the staid, reasonable, dispassionate headline, UFO Chiller, Did They Seize Couple?
UFO Chiller, I love it.
The Hills claimed to be mortified. And actually, on the same day the article came out, they said they saw a red light in the sky following their car.
Yeah, they had to go pick up a copy.
They wondered if the visitors had also heard about the increased publicity.
Oh, shit, we're in the paper, guys. This one said I had a big nose. Rude.
They had to use this picture.
It's just a shitty line drawing that Barney did.
Now, the Hills were apparently mortified by this sudden rush of publicity and didn't want it, which for me makes it strange that less than 2 weeks later, on November 7th, they were speaking to a crowd of 400 at a Unitarian church in nearby Dover.
Maybe they felt more comfortable with people who believed in this stuff. Maybe they just didn't want the people who didn't. And that could include the people on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission and all that.
And by the end of that month, they had inked a book deal with author John Fuller and Dr. Simon, who obviously had a lot of involvement in this story too, and technically ownership over the tapes.
Yeah, but he was just going to say that this didn't happen. They just think it is. So it's an interesting choice.
The resulting book is called Interrupted Journey. They decided that 1/3 of the profits would go to Fuller, with the other 2/3 to be split between Dr. Simon and the Hills. Took some negotiating to get that done, but I think it went about 1/3 to each of them.
Okay.
There were months of negotiating over these contracts, as well as arguments about what could be in the book, of course. Because Fuller's publisher, the author, wanted a sensational, adventure
UFO
piece.
chiller.
Yes, a UFO chiller. Did they seize couple? Simon, however, insisted on having approval and disapproval rights, more importantly, of all medical statements, claims, or conclusions made in the book. He didn't want any quackery to be involved if his name was going to be on it. Mm-hmm. And he forced a rewrite of the entire book after he read the first draft because he insisted that Fuller included at least the possibility and some of the scientific background on false memories.
Well, yeah, if this guy is going to be involved, that's what's going to happen.
Exactly. The book was published in 1966. It sold nearly 300,000 copies and shot to the top of the New York Times bestseller list.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. It was actually adapted in 1975. James Earl Jones himself bought the movie rights because he wanted to portray Barney.
That's great.
And he did, opposite Estelle Parsons, Oscar winner for Bonnie and Clyde, in a film called The UFO Incident, which aired for the first time on October 20th, 1975 on NBC.
Is that available to find anywhere?
Boy, I hope so. Because if it is, Patreon content.
Hell yeah. Love me some JEJ.
Throughout 1966 and 67, the Hills, who must have been getting pretty comfortable pretty quickly with all this publicity, spent basically the whole 2-year period on the road promoting the book at colleges, public meetings, and on radio and TV shows. They appeared on many of the most popular shows of the day, The Mike Douglas Show, To Tell the Truth, Art Linkletter, The Merv Griffin Show, The Alan Douglas Show.
Are any of these online, these interviews?
Those appearances, yes, you can find them. They're not revealing or interesting as much as they're fun.
But just to see is interesting.
Totally. Betty always is having more fun than Barney.
Yeah, that seems like a trend.
Now, around the same time, a UFO researcher friend who they'd made in the early days of this, a guy named Robert Homan, got back in touch and got the Hills interested in the idea, Betty certainly interested in the idea of calling these aliens back.
Barney's like, no!
No, remember, they were elated afterward.
Yeah, that it was done.
Well, they feel like these aren't... definitely get the sense that Betty and
Barney's like, Betty, you didn't get the needle in the ass, okay? Like, I could see why you might want them back.
She got the painful needle. I don't know why she wants them back either. So, psychic research friends told her that the best way to psychically contact the aliens would be to return all of the items that were in the car that night to the car.
Including the dog?
Not the dog. Along with her star map. Well, no, because it has to be all the time.
Okay.
From then on, the car contained the star map and everything that was in it that night.
Yeah, I can't have the dog living in the car.
No, not ideal.
Did the dog's behavior ever change?
No, the dog was sweet.
No, I know, but like, did it ever act weird after this? Or like, was it just in the car the whole time?
It was in the car the whole time during the abduction experience. Barney's regression says that when he came back, Delsey was curled up in a ball under one of the seats, terrified.
Poor baby.
But Betty's regression said that Delsey was sitting up on the front seat waiting for her when she got back to the car, which was like 5 seconds later.
Interesting.
Yeah, there are differences between their accounts.
Yeah. As long as she's good.
She's good. So at Robert Homan's instruction, Betty starts doing daily sessions of psychically and verbally calling out to the aliens from her front porch. She would sit on the front porch for 5 to 10 minutes, just mentally talking to the beings.
Okay.
During this time, there were also they thought it might be working because Betty and Barney both reported seeing UFO sightings, Betty more so.
Yeah, well, when you go on the porch like, oh, my belly button's out. Huh, weird. I wonder what I could do with this belly button.
She's like trying to seduce them. Oops. It just came out again.
It's just the belly button.
They also noticed some light poltergeist activity.
Oh. In the house.
They came home one day and found a chunk of ice on the table underneath a newspaper.
Listen, having a dachshund is always having light poltergeist activity.
Well, that's what I was thinking when I saw this other one. It says phantom footsteps. It's like, our little tiny dog can sound pretty big. Sometimes.
He's always click-clacking around the house.
Yeah, so she saw, anyway, Betty, I don't need to tell you this, obviously saw the lights in the sky and the noises around the house as evidence that her psychic callouts were working and the aliens were responding, at least in some small way.
Mm-hmm. Coming to peep that button.
Yeah, that's right. Now, unfortunately, Barney's health had never been great this whole time, and it took a downswing in 1968. Starting with they were still doing a lot of public speaking and traveling. And at one appearance in early 1968, he got so weak, he had to lean on a chair the whole time he spoke, although he did do the rest of the presentation, almost like, do you remember the story of Houdini's death?
Yes.
They went to the hospital on the way home, where the doctor couldn't diagnose him with anything more than transient dizziness.
Transient dizziness?
Like the kind of dizziness a transient gets.
Yeah, what is that?
So, nevertheless, Barney decided it was time to get serious about his health. And apparently in 1968, he was making an effort to exercise. He quit smoking. He started dieting. But a lifetime of unhealthy habits and high stress had taken their toll, and it was too late. On February 25th, 1969, Barney suffered a massive stroke.
Oh, man.
He was 46 years old. Betty wrote in her diary...
He died.
Yes. Betty wrote in her diary that day that the doctor had told her to pray Barney wouldn't survive because of the condition the stroke would have left him in.
God. Thanks, Doc. What the fuck?
Yeah, it's not great bedside manner.
Jeez.
This left Betty more or less alone in the world, except with the people she'd met on her sort of UFO journey. The good news is, Betty had already made some friends through all this, and she would continue to make friends in the UFO community for the rest of her life. In 1968, she had heard from an elementary teacher named Marjorie Fish, who had read the book, read Interrupted Journey, and became obsessed with the star map.
Love Marge Fish.
This is just an elementary teacher. She made a 3D model resembling the star map with string and beads, like a solar system diorama.
Yeah. She probably had it left over from the solar system unit.
And spent like 6 months just examining her model from every possible angle until she could get it to work. Oh, sorry. The model was of like a bunch of sun-like stars nearby, nearby our solar system. And she was just looking at it from different angles until she found something that looked like the star map that Betty had drawn.
So she didn't make the model of the star map.
No, she made the model of the actual cosmos.
I see. Okay. I was just thinking she made the model of the star map and then was just staring at that for 6 months.
I understand, but that's crazy, right? And just examining it from different points of view until she can get it to look. Remember, the star map is this.
It's fairly specific for it being stars. I couldn't do something like that.
Are you sure you couldn't?
I could do a bunch of dots and stuff, but I can't make it look like anything.
This doesn't look like anything.
Look like anything that's actually in the sky.
So eventually, in fact, Marjorie Fish did find one angle that seemed to match Betty's star map. And that suggested that these two stars you see at the bottom right here with the thickest line connecting them represented the binary star system of Zeta Reticuli. It's two stars rotating around each other, 39.3 light years from Earth.
Okay.
Now, a statistician named David Saunders, he actually worked on the Condon UFO study, a study pre-Project Blue Book even, that basically said, UFOs are probably nonsense. It's definitely not worth studying them. So he was a statistician who worked on that. So you'd think he's a pretty hard-headed guy. He said that the unusual alignment of key sun-like stars that you see in that star map was statistically improbable to happen by chance.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't think I could make it be something that exists. I could put a bunch of dots and lines on a piece of paper, but that doesn't mean it's going to match up to anything.
It's true. But not everyone feels that way, of course. In 1980, in a Cosmos episode, Carl Sagan pointed out that if you remove the lines from both the actual star map and the one that Marjorie drew, it's kind of hard to say they even really look similar.
If you remove the lines.
Yeah. Like you can only
the
make...
dots would still be there, the stars or whatever.
Right, but it's harder to say they look similar when they don't have the lines to help.
Interesting. Looks pretty good to me.
Well, yeah, but if you removed the lines, you would see that the distances are all stretched out this way.
Well, first of all, it was in a dream / hypnosis. And second of all, I'm terrible at any sort of height or distance or anything. So, I mean, you could just kind of vaguely remember it.
Right, but then I still find it hard to believe that you'd even vaguely remember it correctly to this degree of detail.
I mean, yeah, it's hard to believe for me at all, but I don't know how hypnosis works.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, Betty did, at least she thought, and she went back for more. In the mid-'70s to early '80s, James Harder, working for the... Don't you dare. James Harder...
What happened to James Hard?
James Harder, working for the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, now defunct, just wanted to find out what these aliens look like. And so, under hypnosis, he asked Betty...
I don't care about that star stuff. I don't care. I just want to know what they look like.
Do you want to know? Betty said that most of the men she saw were similar, but there was one different from the rest, who was a weird little angry guy. He was 3.5 feet tall,
Oh,
which is smaller than the rest of them were between 4 and 5 feet.
this isn't the leader guy.
No, not the one she called the leader before.
Okay.
This one had a basketball-like head and a large, flat-eyed face. She said his eyes were like fully black with maybe a little white showing around the outsides.
I'd be mad if I looked like this too.
He had a broad, flat, small nose, and his mouth was a thin, wide slit.
Ugh.
He had a thick build, a thick neck, broad shoulders, and a big barrel chest. 4 short, stubby fingers on each hand with no nails. And under hypnosis, this time Betty said that he kept staring at her and glaring. She says this is the one who told the leader, the one she had called the leader,
That she couldn't keep the book?
that she couldn't keep the
What
book.
was his book, Sean?
So this might have been, maybe this was the actual leader. She said all of the creatures lacked hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes. They had gray skin, no protruding ears, long, slender hands with 1 thumb and 4 fingers. The examiner, the one who looked at her, was 4.5 feet tall, so just a little shorter than the average. His head shape was more like ours than the really small guy, and in proportion, and he had facial features similar to the little guy, kind of wraparound, flat eyes, small mouth, but with bumpy skin. She said it wasn't not bumpy like a basketball, for example, but she couldn't exactly, it just wasn't smooth, but she couldn't get into more detail than that. The one she had called the leader before, she now described as good looking, but clarified that she meant more human.
Good looking for an alien.
Yeah. She said he had a triangular face that tapered down to a very thin chin and a small mouth and nose. It's funny, they're not exactly grays like the Roswell aliens you think of, but there's similarities here. You can see...
Yeah, the big eyes.
The tapering down from a large top of the head to a small chin, the tiny nose and mouth.
Slender fingers.
Slender fingers with no nails. And they're short. They're about the same height as grays, right? 4.5, 5 feet.
Couldn't tell you. I haven't met one.
Okay. You have to talk to Betty and Barney.
Yeah.
Betty added some details under hypnosis that she said had been withheld from the public, but, quote, since you are interested in their evolution, I will confidently reveal some of these.
Well, excuse me, Betty.
She said Barney said he saw inside the mouth of the examiner, and there were no teeth, but maybe a small tongue. And this is really weird. He said there was a membrane over the mouth that fluttered when the creature spoke its own humming-style language.
Weird.
She said they were top-heavy and walked with a rolling sea legs kind of a gait.
Yeah, so do I.
But even though they appeared to walk with difficulty and were objectively scrawny, two of them carried Barney along easily. So they're very strong. And outside, she said she thought she'd seen one of the crew members gulping like a fish, so she thought they might have trouble breathing our atmosphere. For her part, Betty also appeared on F. Lee Bailey's television series Lie Detector in the year 1983, where she received a lie detector test on 3 questions.
F. Lee Bailey, lie detector. Didn't he work for O.J. Simpson?
Yeah, it's funny. The first question was, did you kill your wife? No, the questions were, did you initially receive the star map information on board a UFO?
Okay.
To which Betty said yes. Did you obtain it from a source other than a UFO? To which Betty said no. Do you believe your star map is a hoax? To which Betty said no. And she passed that lie detector test with flying colors.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout the 70s and 80s, Betty became something of a sensation on the UFO circuit. She was also something of an investigator. Given her own experience with it, she was brought in on investigations of...
Is she like the Lorraine Warren of UFOs?
Kind of. She investigated like 100 different claims of
Where's
abduction.
this movie? I like that.
And she found them mostly to be bullshit.
Huh.
She said, quote, of all the abductions I have personally investigated, in my opinion, only 9 were true abductions. I think many of the others have a feeling of complete powerlessness, end quote, that they're trying to, deal with.
Interesting. You'd think that she'd verify more of them, thinking that it would make her story sound better.
Yeah, it's true. Although I think there's also an element of when a story's really kooky, it's only going to discredit the other UFO people, whether they're telling the truth or not.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, in 1991, Betty, speaking of that, was disillusioned by the misuse of hypnosis and the, quote, kooks in the UFO field, and she retired basically from public life. She apparently lived a happy and pretty active and pretty social life, withdrawing a little bit more into her she was friends with all the boys over at Pease Air Force Base, but that closed eventually. And she spent just a lot more time with family and stuff, and she finally passed October 23rd, 2004.
Gosh.
So she outlived Barney by a good...
half a century?
Well, almost 40 years anyway, yeah.
Wow. Crazy.
And that's the story of Betty and Barney Hill. I don't have anything else for you.
So what do you think, Sean?
What do I think? I don't see any reason not to go with Dr. Simon's theory.
Mm-hmm.
I just think, right? I mean, I feel like here's people have often said that this was the Hills.
Do you think it's like a folie à dos, like the Time Slips episode?
I think some of that plays into it. Yeah, I think they played into each other on this. I think you had Barney and Betty driving down the road. Betty really excited about the idea that this might be a flying saucer or something, and really, it sounded like she was badgering Barney about it on the road. He hears her say it enough times. Now he's starting to get nervous too, thinking, well, maybe, but no, but maybe, when somebody says something enough times. And then Barney, who, remember, is a combat veteran from World War II, and a guy who's under a lot of stress and probably doesn't get a lot of sleep ever. And his wife's been telling him for 2 hours that there's a UFO following them. He gets out of the car. He sees something that makes him jump back in and say, we're going to be captured. And they flee. After that, I think they just, got home a little later than they were expecting.
A little? That was almost double the amount of time the trip should have taken. And it was overnight. There's no reason it should have taken that long.
Sources will often cite that drive should have been 4 hours or so.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that when I Google Mapsed it, and I would assume the speed limits and roads are better and higher now.
Well, you don't know if there used to be a different route
That's true.
that isn't there anymore.
But from what I can tell, it takes 5 hours and 17 minutes to drive from
Still
Montreal to Portsmouth.
2 hours unaccounted for.
It is still 2 hours unaccounted for. And yet, people get lost.
I guess.
And that, for me, explains it easier than it being aliens. Then you've got Betty has some wild dreams 10 days later. That makes sense because they've been wondering about the lost time.
I mean, it just feels like for me, if you believe them, and obviously that's the first hurdle, if you believe them, that shared loss of time for both of them is very odd.
I know, but it's also the kind of, again, folie à deux. It's the kind of thing they could talk themselves and each other into over the course of a few weeks, too.
How do you explain the watches? If you believe them.
They didn't notice the watches were stopped until the next day?
But both of them?
Well, they were both watches that you would have to wind every couple of days anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So they would stop, but usually you're supposed to wind it up and then it starts again.
Mm-hmm.
Neither of their watches ever ran again. So that's definitely curious.
Very curious.
And the shiny spots on the trunk are interesting, I guess, but I don't think the paint was even gone. I think they were just shiny. So that's something I could see. I don't know where it came from, but it could have been there before they just didn't notice. That stuff's the physical evidence. None of it's that crazy compelling to me.
Do you believe that they believe this happened?
100%.
Okay.
There's no Barney Hill wasn't putting on a show.
No,
on that
he
tape.
was terrified, and he was not. There's like a stereotype of manly, like manly screaming or whatever, and he was not playing into any of that. He was not trying to be masculine or manly or whatever. He was screaming. He was horrified.
Betty said whenever the subject of the tapes came up, he would be deeply uncomfortable because he didn't think he sounded manly on them. And when other people were listening to the tapes...
Because he was genuinely horrified.
Yeah. And when other people were listening to the tapes, whenever those parts came up, she could tell how uncomfortable he was because he would go, "Can you believe that? Can you believe that stuff?"
Yeah, so I feel if he was faking it, you would have faked it differently. Especially if it made him uncomfortable all the time afterward.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The hypnosis thing is fascinating. Maybe we should do an episode on hypnotic regression more broadly, because I'd love to look into the merits of that.
Yeah, I've always wondered if I should go into some sort of hypnotic therapy thing for my fear of flying, because it's been that severe, like, for a long time. I would love to not have that fear anymore if that's something that actually works. But like, hypnotists in Connecticut, like, I don't know what to Google for that.
Probably that.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, then I'd get like the amazing Samuel or something. Like,
so you've never been hypnotized even at like a party or something?
No, I know people that have done it at like college functions. I think my friend Sarah was once. No, I don't know what it's. I would love to be hypnotized because I think it would be like really a wild experience, but I've never been hypnotized.
If anyone listening is a hypnotist
or has been hypnotized,
well, no, get at us and hypnotize us on the air.
Oh, for sure. But I want to know from anyone who actually has been hypnotized as well. Like, I've heard of people clucking like a chicken and they don't remember it and stuff. I think that's fascinating.
Even I just love the premise that in those tapes we hear Dr. Simon say, "You can remember it all now, and you can tell me everything, but you're not going to get upset." It's like he can just, you just put control of your mental state in his hands so completely.
Yeah, that is crazy. It's a crazy concept.
Yeah, it's like, how can you, I don't know, somewhere between conscious and unconscious, I guess, but I don't know. I'm very curious about hypnosis. But in any case, let's just say hypnotic regression is real. Mm-hmm. Let's just say you can access memories you wouldn't be able to access otherwise with hypnosis. Dr. Simon said that it's definitely possible to pull up false memories. And of course, we know where Betty gets the false memories from because she dreamed about these things. Mm-hmm. As for Barney, he had definitely heard Betty's accounts of the dreams. Barney thought it was a ridiculous suggestion that he had absorbed so much of... It's almost like he was saying, like, "I don't listen to my wife. What do you mean?"
He does find her annoying sometimes.
So he found that ridiculous, the idea that he would have accidentally remembered what Betty had said. Mm-hmm. But But he also has his eyes. It's a way less detailed account. And he gives sort of the generics you would expect. He gives the generalities of a actual medical exam, kind of, with the added stuff with the genitals and the butthole, which a straight American man in 1961 is just so uncomfortable with that stuff that he's like, if he's nervous about missing time, it's because he's worried someone did something to his butt and his penis.
Well, specifically the latter, because he went right into the bathroom to check it.
Check on those genitals. Let's check them out.
Yeah.
So is it a weird story? Yeah. Yeah, it's a real weird story. That's why I wanted to cover it. But I think it's best explained with a shared hysteria.
I don't know. I think they're both being honest in how they feel and what they think happened. And beyond that, couldn't tell you.
If anyone wants to read further into this, I'll say my main source was Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill story. That's Captured, ! Like it's a musical.
Captured.
Hey, start writing it, Carrie. Captured. Which is by Kathleen Marden, who's actually the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. And a member of, she's a pretty high-ranking member of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, which is sort of the, I don't know, they've got to be the biggest UFO group in the world, right?
I think so, yeah.
They're the ones you hear about the most often. They're definitely the most enthusiastic. Vocal UFO group in the world. So she's a high-ranking member there, so you know how Kathleen feels about UFOs.
Sure.
And she wrote the book with Stanton Friedman, who's kind of one of the fathers of modern alien conspiracy thought.
Ufology.
Yeah. So that's kind of the book. Again, Interrupted Journey was the name of the original book written about and based on the Hills hypnotic regressions, but that went out of print in 1988, so it might be a little hard to find. Captured is kind of the book to read about this, I think. Although you have to remember it's a book that is arguing for, yes, these were really UFOs.
Sure. All right.
I don't find Kathleen's arguments very convincing, but who knows? You may. What do you think, Carrie? The things you said during this episode make me feel like you fully believe Betty and Barney Hill.
I believe that, like I said, they're being honest and that they believe that's what happened. And they're not intentionally trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. And like I said, beyond that, I don't know.
Do you believe that 5-foot-tall men from Zeta Reticuli took them into a large silver disc-shaped craft and inserted a small object into Barney Hill's anus?
I don't know, but I believe that there is life beyond Earth. Just
mathematically,
yes.
Yes.
Intelligent life, I should say. And I will never fully discount like a UFO type of situation based on, well, aliens aren't real. Because I think statistically they probably are. I mean, we're gonna discuss this. That's kind of the Fermi Paradox.
Yeah, I want to do an episode on the Fermi Paradox, which rests on the idea that it's statistically just about impossible that there wouldn't be other intelligent life out there somewhere because there's so many stars.
So why haven't we met any?
Right, that's the paradox.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's my belief, is that the universe is literally like infinite. We can't be the only thing that's alive. You know.
Agreed, but that doesn't mean that they've come here.
No, but it could. I mean, we say, oh, we can't go faster than the speed of light or whatever, all that stuff.
Stanton Friedman points...
We don't know what's possible even on Earth in a million years, you know?
Well, Stanton Friedman points out that as you approach the speed of light, Einstein said your subjective perception of time would get slower. Mm-hmm. And so Friedman says that for someone traveling from Earth to Zeta Reticuli, if they were going at close to the speed of light, it might only take for them about 40 months in the spaceship, even though it would take thousands of years in the actual spaceship.
Well, after all, Sean, what is time?
Yes, exactly. They didn't know. I will, just on that Stanton Friedman thing, I don't think he realizes that doesn't solve the problem with space travel, because the ship is still taking thousands of years to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Just the people inside can survive the trip now, but that doesn't mean you can make a space empire where every trip takes 40, 50, 100,000 years.
Watch me, Sean.
Oh.
Want to treat your pup to something special? When you visit www.barkbox.com/ain'titscary, you can receive a free month added to your plan when you sign up for a 6 or 12-month subscription. That's an extra month of 2 fun toys, 2 full-size bags of treats, and a tasty chew at no additional cost. Recent box themes have included Home Alone, Lick or Treat, and A Night at the Squeakeasy. Poe loves trying out new toys and treats, and he was psyched to get a BarkBox. Your pup will be too. So sign up at www.barkbox.com/ain'titscary for a free month added to any 6 or 12-month subscription. That's barkbox.com/ain'titscary. Give your furry friends something to bark about.
BarkBox. Carrie purchased. Poe approved.
Let's head on back to Poe's Cryptid Corner. In January, Oklahoma House of Representatives member Justin Humphrey introduced a new bill to the state legislature that called for the establishment of an official Bigfoot hunting season.
Woo! Yes! Let's go!
Under the parameters of Humphrey's bill, licenses would be regulated by the Oklahoma Wildlife Conservation Commission, and set dates would be established for hunting Bigfoot, big feet, not sure, just like other wildlife, like deer. Humphrey stated, quote, "Tourism is one of the biggest attractions we have in my house district. Establishing an actual hunting season and issuing licenses for people who want to hunt Bigfoot will just draw more people to our already beautiful part of the state. It'll be a great way for people to enjoy our area and have some fun." The bill would only allow trapping Bigfoot, not killing him or her. Humphrey is also hoping to secure a $25,000 bounty to be paid out to anyone who successfully captures the creature. Initially, this story seemed pretty crazy, but I don't know. It could be a fun way to get some people to visit Oklahoma. And I like that the monetary reward hinges on not killing the Bigfoot. So I say, good for Justin Humphrey.
Well, yeah, you also just can't have hundreds of tourists out there with guns shooting at an imaginary man.
You can during Bigfoot hunting season, Sean. That's it for this episode of Ain't It Scary with Sean and Carrie. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Ain't It Scary, and check out our website at ain'titscary.com. You can support the show by supporting our sponsors and becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/ain'titscary. And please subscribe to the show and throw us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We'll be forever grateful.
Yep, special thanks to our Tier 3 patrons, Nate Curtis, Sean O'Donnell, Jared Chamberlain, and Maria Ferrante.
See you next Thursday.
Show created by Carrie and Sean McCabe, music by Kyle Ryan. You can check him out over at his YouTube channel, Music is a Verb.
This has been a production of Longboy Media.